piano singing his song. All the little birds on Jaybird Street love to hear the robin go tweet, 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 rockin' robin, tweet, tweet.
Well, I'm not showing, that doesn't matter. We're here to talk to Patrick Hurley, who's project manager of the Memphremagog Watershed Association, MWA. Welcome to Life is Good. I'm Heather McEwen, your ever-loving hostess, and I'm about to learn a whole lot about the watershed and what you do.
Indeed.
Well, you've talked to me a lot about river care and river stewardship and everything like that, and going from farm to farm, landowner to landowner to try and get cooperation. But what do you want to talk about?
Some recent projects that we've implemented, I suppose.
Go for it.
Yeah. So we, in 2023, we implemented 2 large restoration projects. One of them is the Valley Brook Stream Bank Management Area Restoration Project.
Try and say that 10 times with your teeth out.
So this is a publicly owned land conservation easement property in Morgan, just upstream from Lake Seymour. And we essentially retired an old dairy farm, decommissioned the barns and buildings, recycled the trusses and the roofing tin, and then reclaimed the site and removed all sorts of constraints that would otherwise be influencing the health and function of the river. So took out 9 culverts, restored 3 acres of wetlands, and about 2 acres of floodplain, reconnected about 500 feet of channel, added a lot of woody habitat structures to retain sediment, slow down the water, provide fish habitat, and it's now completely open to the public. 160 acres for hunting, fishing, trapping, wildlife viewing, all the good stuff.
Where is that exactly?
It's on Valley Road, just upstream from the public town beach in Seymour, in the town of Morgan on Lake Seymour, I should say. And it's owned by the Fish and Wildlife Department of Vermont. And so that's up watershed, as we say. And then we also implemented a stormwater treatment project in Newport City, which is right on the side of the lake, right on the shore.
Is that the one that's opening today?
Yep, we're having our ceremony today.
We're going to move on after this stunning interview in my living room to a more stunning area. But really seriously, it's on Ferret Street.
Ferret Lake, yep.
And tell me how that started and what you had to do to get it implemented, please, because
Sure.
I don't know.
Sure, yeah. So it's a lot different flavor of restoration project than the Valley Brook project, which was a natural resource project. This is very much an infrastructural project. So I think in about 2015 or 16, the Memphremagog Stormwater Master Plan was developed, and that was something that MWA spearheaded, try to identify the most low-hanging fruit, easier opportunities, most significant opportunities to manage stormwater runoff from urban areas. We're in the Northeast Kingdom, but there are still some heavily developed areas in the villages and in the middle of town. And one of the most significant projects was the neighborhood uphill gradient of Prouty Bay, which is kind of near, built by Newport and the old teddy bear factory, the old Numia medical building. So about 125 acres of neighborhood drains to Prouty Bay. It's collected at the bottom of the neighborhood through an existing stormwater catchment system.
Which isn't the best.
It was not the best.
It is now.
Now it's great. So previously it would straight pipe directly into the lake and dump a lot of sediment, water, proposed water quality issues. We had a lot of localized cyanobacteria blooms there.
I know.
And the Marina Association at the Newport Marina would actually have to dredge every so often at quite an expense, $30,000 usually per event, to remove all the silt and sediment that had been accumulating at the outlet of the storm drain, and was really, not allowing them to fully utilize the space, the marina, and it was really impacting the operation. So, so they approached the Memphremagog Watershed Association kind of simultaneously as the Stormwater Master Plan was being developed, and this Ferret Street Stormwater Improvement Project kind of was born. It took a long time to get it designed and permitted.
What do you consider a long time?
Since 2016. So 8 years from conception to completion.
That's a long gestation period.
That's a long gestation period, yep. And had gone through a couple different project managers over that time period. and MW had sought funding to implement and construct the project and was turned down twice before being awarded third time's a charm. And it's a $500,000 stormwater improvement project. So essentially what we did was we tied into the existing storm system, diverted that water from the straight pipe that previously went to the lake, carried it back down Ferrant Street towards the intersection of Lake Street, and then that stormwater then goes into what's called a swirl separator or hydrodynamic separator. So essentially a big underground chamber that separates grit and oils and grease and trash, flotsam, whatever, from the water column essentially. And so from that separator you can vacuum out the trash and the grit with a vector truck, take that away much like you would a regular catch basin. But then the water is actually diverted into a gravel treatment wetland. So it's a recessed basin, and there is about 1/10 of an acre footprint, and that basin will swell 3 feet with water following a rain event, and then slowly percolate into the gravel subgrade, and then it exits the wetland through an underdrain that then discharges to the lake. So,
and that kind of water, after it's been percolated and de-escalated, it gets cleaner?
Yeah, so the first kind of the pre-treatment would be that swirl separator. So it's taking out the real heavy particulate load, it's taking out trash and organic matter.
Fantastic.
And then as it's passing through the wetland, it's quite literally being filtered through the media of the soil. There's topsoil, kind of a mucky topsoil, like a wetland soil. And then there's sand, and then there's gravel, and it very much acts like a typical, like a well would. Whereas you have a gravel layer around your well and a screen to kind of reduce the silt and the sediment. It's kind of the reverse. Instead of water coming into the well, it's going out of the wetland. And so as the water's passing through the ground, bacteria are eating other bacteria like E. coli. So they're removing those kind of fecal coliform and E. coli contaminants that would otherwise make it to the lake. And that comes from like dog waste, cat waste, leaks in sewer systems, leach fields that somehow aren't functioning properly and make it into the storm drain system. So it's taking care of bacteria that way. And then the actual microbes in the soil are taking up nutrients. So it's going to become a lush, wetland, vegetated system.
Fantastic.
As it matures. So those plants are soaking up nitrogen, phosphorus is binding, so dissolving phosphorus in the water column, which is really what feeds the algae blooms in Lake Memphremagog. So that phosphorus binds to the soil, binds to the sediments, and it's taken up by other microbes in the plants. And then the under drain is essentially the outlet pipe. So that water is being cleaned as it goes through the ground, discharged to the lake. We'll have on site, we have a comparison. Mason jar full of the effluent and a mason jar full of the influent, and I'll let you decide whether it looks cleaner or not.
Which one will you make me drink?
Both of them. You got to try both flavors to know which one you like best, right?
Try before you die.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Well, no, I think it's a wonderful thing you're doing. Example of what might be coming next. I live on a storm drain. It comes into my driveway, and I built a ditch, and I have to keep shoveling out the ditch.
Yeah.
And that really shouldn't be my problem. However, it is. But I've just heard at the last town meeting with the mayor and the city managers and the city councilors and everybody that they're coming through at this filter plant, this water filtration plant or whatever I've got down there, that they're going to do something about the same, I think it might be the same theme as you have right down at the end of my property.
Okay.
And that would be thrilling because it leads into Scott Cove.
Yep.
And you've had some dealings with Scott Cove, have you not?
Yeah, we're working on an invasive species control project. So we received $20,000 from the Vermont Outdoor Recreation Economic Collaborative Grant, which is a partnership that MWA is in with 10 other local organizations.
I'm so glad you got that. They got $200,000. It was spearheaded by Rick Chase.
Yep, NDD.
And Newport Downtown Development is a godsend to this area, and that's how I've come in contact with so many bright minds. And my idea about this area in Newport has gone from 5 years ago wondering what the heck is going on around here to, wow, I can't wait till tomorrow because of all the things you and your friends are doing.
There's a lot of things going on. And we're just a small piece of that collective. So we got 20 grand from that grant, and then my colleague Gabrielle Giannoni at MWA was able to obtain another $55,000 from the Leahy Clean Water Fund, which is money's coming from the Great Lake Fishery Commission. So we're leveraging those two grants to remove the Phragmites infestation. Phragmites is a very large reed that grows on the edge of the lake.
And I've got them as pets down at the end of my yard.
Got some pet, yep. And so they're invasive, they're very aggressive. They kind of push out native species. They don't provide great wildlife habitat. And at the moment, it's choking out Scott's Cove at the outlet. And it's actually blocking the view shed and access to the lake from Prouty Beach, Bluffside Farm, and the footbridge.
Oh my.
So we're working to eradicate that infestation and try to repopulate it with native species.
Your project on doing that is pulling them voluntarily.
Well, that's how we started.
I'm looking at Agent Orange just coming in here and just defoliating.
So that's how it started. We've had, I think, 3 years now of volunteer-led, we call them Phragmites pulling parties. Everybody loves alliteration. And we have been clipping them at the base under the water level and then physically removing the reeds and disposing of them. It's a pretty challenging plant because not only will the reed, if you just left it to float away, it will actually reroot.
I know, they're nervy.
Else.
They're nervy, they're pushy, they're antagonistic, and they're ugly as sin.
They're ugly as sin. They're also twofold. I mean, so you can try to cut them back and drown them out, or really, it's really you're cutting them back to stress them, and you keep cutting them back to the point where they lose all the reserves in their root system so they can't actually survive any longer. But the real challenge is that they're allelopathic, meaning they exude these chemicals from their roots that are toxic to other plant species.
Oh, what nasty rascals.
So they're total nasty rascals, and so there's going to be, as we scale up, now that we have some funding, we don't rely so much on volunteers, it's a pretty Herculean task to do that by volunteers. So we're going to hire some big guns that do this professionally at great scale, and there's going to be a mix of mechanical and chemical treatment. So we can't use herbicides in the water, so those will be mechanically removed. And then stem applied herbicide will be used. So you cut the stem and then dab it with this herbicide.
Really?
And it takes out the herbicide and kills it from the roots.
Fantastic. So, okay. As we're talking about this, I'm getting off topic because I really want to talk about the watershed. But as long as they're on Scott's Cove.
Sure, yeah.
I have beaver.
Oh yeah, we love beaver.
And I love my beaver down there. And they cut my trees, but they cut them down at night, and I pull them to the side of the water in the morning so they can carry them away. We're kind of a team. But
you're assisting, yeah.
I love beavers because it's Canada's national animal.
It is, yes.
And I respect them like heck. But I'm wondering, when you remove these reeds, is it going to hurt the beaver population?
So the beavers can't utilize the Phragmites. Nothing really eats the Phragmites to begin with.
No, but when you bring your mechanical thingies in, you're not going to destroy their dam, are you?
There are no, so you mean the dam right by the outlet? Is there a dam? There's no dam at the outlet as far as I'm aware.
Well, I don't know where they're building it, but they're taking my trees locally so that
I think you probably have bank denning beavers. So there are beavers that build lodges that are mounds, and there are beavers that burrow into the banks of the lake or of the river. I would imagine up here in this end of Scott's Cove, you probably have bank denning beavers. And the thing about where we're treating is it is a monotypic culture of Phragmites. There is no other species there. There's no other vegetation. There's no critters that we can at least see.
Okay, I just thought mechanical teams would come in there and chomp up everything they built, and I was worried about that, but I shouldn't, because you're doing everything correctly. And
we do. We try to follow all the rules. We get all the permits and regulations. There's a lot of them out there. We are a nonprofit. That does not mean we are exempt from any of the rules.
I know that.
In fact, because we use grant funds, I think we're held to a higher standard.
Well, one of the things I knew about you when we first started speaking was that you are filled with integrity. And you care as much as, I grew up on this lake, but you care as much about this lake now after just living here a few years as I have all my life. And so the lake's in good hands.
We'd like to think
and
so.
the MWA, how many people are members of that right now?
Oh, I don't know. You'd have to ask the board. I think probably somewhere around 50, but that's not enough. We need the whole community, not just residents of Newport, but residents of Derby, Newport Town, and the upper watershed. That includes Morgan, Charleston, Westmore, Albany, Craftsbury, Coventry, Irisburg, Barton, Glover, Orleans. There's a lot of towns in this watershed, and we really should have membership from all of those communities, because people might live upriver, but they're still part of our watershed, and we'd like to really bring the whole kind of holistic approach to the upper watershed, because once you have problems in the lake, you're kind of out of luck. You got to work up watershed.
Yeah.
And so that's why we're focusing a lot of the rivers upstream, a lot of the farms and a lot of the properties upstream, upriver, because all that water drains to the lake.
Yeah.
And while we can address some issues around the lake or in the lake directly, it's a lot more challenging to deal with it once it makes it to the lake.
That's for sure.
So.
When I was working on the Northern Star, they started the school programs teaching students about watershed.
Yeah.
And I thought, because I'd taken a watershed course at CCV, that, oh yeah, I know everything about the watershed. I knew nothing compared to what those people came in on the Northern Star to teach.
Yeah.
From where they were coming from, how large it was. That's what blows me away, because when you think watershed at this end, I don't think, I had never really expanded upon the territory.
Yeah.
And when you see a map of what the watershed incorporates, it blows your mind.
Yeah.
And we are just the receiving end of, I don't know how many miles of river and stream and eddy and whatever.
Yeah.
Thousands and thousands of miles of water come in here.
Especially when you think about the ephemeral and intermittent streams that don't run all the time, but ran last night when we got an inch or two of rain in some places of the watershed. So yeah, there's no shortage of water this year like there was last year.
And 2 years ago also, eh? Oh.
But recently we're in a drought.
I know.
So there's a lot of lag effects that happen following a drought right immediately after a big rain like that, where you've got soils that are so dry. It's amazing. Dry soils actually can't absorb water, and so they shed water faster. Slightly damp soils, they have that capillary action. They can absorb a lot quicker and a lot more. And so when we have a huge flood following a prolonged multi-year drought, that's when things get wild.
Yeah, that's when everything ends up here really quickly.
That's when everything lands in the lake.
Now, the new watershed project that is starting today, is it already completely ready to go?
Yeah, it's been online since October, but it's a construction project, and so following a construction project, you have to restabilize and revegetate the whole site. So because we put 700 feet of storm drain underground and we put 10 underground structures in place, there's a lot of dirt work, and so we had to essentially regrade, retopsoil, reseed, revegetate the whole site. So with that, you have to wait through the winter and the spring to see, was there any erosion, was there any runoff problems. So we did some minor site work. There were 2 little spots right by the fire hydrant at the intersection where some water had jumped off the road and scoured a little path. So we had our contractor come back and just patch that up recently, and then just making sure all the vegetation takes and all the shrubs start establishing. And now things look green and pretty, so we'd like to show it off.
And the root systems are holding things together.
Starting to grow, yep.
Who's your contractor?
So we hired Dale E. Percy Incorporated out of Stowe. They did a fantastic job. I can't say enough good things about them. They not only had a great approach and a great timeline, and they were a very cost-effective contractor. We actually had 7 or 8 bids from firms all over the state. We awarded to Dale E. Percy because we had great references from them, and their approach was just detailed. A lot of times you get a bid and you don't get anything else, but they had a proposal that outlined exactly what their approach was going to be, how they were going to de-water and deal with water in the job site, because remember, this is in a lake and we're digging sometimes 15-foot holes.
Did they put cofferdams around in order?
No, we did diversion and dewatering practices. So we would pump the water out of the work area and then discharge it through filter bags, so silt filter bags, and then have that pass or disperse across a vegetated area and slowly make its way back to the lake or to just disconnected drainage areas.
Got a little family thing to tell you.
Sure.
My dad was the first North American to work with electrical submersible pumps.
Oh, neat.
So my dad would have invented some of the things you
Yeah.
use.
Well, funny you say that. A bunch of the neighbors kept turning off the submersible pumps overnight because they didn't like the noise. So every morning we'd show up, there'd be 5 feet of water in our hole, and it would slow us down for 2 hours.
Well, shout out to those neighbors, come on.
Yeah.
I'm really proud of my father. He was one of the first people who started the Memphremagog Conservation Society.
Yeah, that's incredible.
He's an anonymous figure, but he was the one who noticed that the phosphates were coming in from the monastery with everybody else. But he was in that business, sewage treatment, electrical
So he
submersible
knew what he was
pumps.
talking about.
And so he educated a lot of the original people, you know, the 6 or 7 fellows who started, and Dr. Farfan, Dr. Hugheslow, my dad, a few others, millions of others, got involved right away because CJAD, the Montreal radio station, got involved. And because Rod, another person who worked at CJAD, was on the lake. And it started out, and in the last few years, I would think my dad would be turning over in his grave seeing what's happening here because it was not good. Right now, I think he's smiling down at you. And he died 11 years ago today. So, Dad,
Who's watching?
don't you worry. We're on it. Well, I'm not on it, Dad. I'm your typical lazy person, but these people are on it. And so many people wanted this lake to be healthy for so long, and something happened. And the watershed, I never considered being the problem. I always considered it being a little closer. I always blamed one person or one industry or something like that. I, in my own ignorance, was not really considering everything.
Yeah, I think a lot of people point to the dump, the landfill in Coventry, as kind of the silver bullet. The unfortunate reality is Memphremagog has been the bilge for over a century for this watershed, and so it has had a century of abuse. And I think what is happening is it has reached its carrying capacity to absorb and buffer that abuse. And it's starting to manifest as, okay, we can't take any more abuse, and it's reflecting in the water. So,
And the fish, and everything else.
and the fish. And so, like, when you look at the water clarity, for instance, right now, it's terrible.
I know.
It looks really bad right now.
Yeah.
And I think part of that is a result of last year's floods. We still have a lot of sediment, suspended sediment, residual, turbidity in the water. Because, you saw how much sediment mobilized after those rains.
Well, yeah.
Entire roads washed out, entire towns were flooded. So we're still grappling with that. There are occasional wastewater spills that have occurred, which certainly aren't helping the situation. I think there are being policies and protocols put in place to make sure that doesn't happen again. But Memphremagog received untreated wastewater up until the mid-70s.
I know.
And there's a dump right downtown at the mouth of the Clyde.
I've seen it.
We found buried garbage in a burned down building when we built our stormwater gravel well. You'll hear all about it later. Cost another $150,000 to deal with. Didn't anticipate that. So this area has been, it was industrialized very heavily, very quickly, and for several decades. And so it's still recovering from that. And then we still have those deluges of floods that then send all of that upriver, up watershed, sediment this way. So it's more than just one lingering problem. It's a multifaceted challenge, and the lake is a huge complex water body, and it's really hard to tie symptoms to specific specific issues. And so one thing that it could vary from just runoff from developed lands, farms, manure fertilization, roads, gravel roads. Gravel roads are not great for watershed. We've got a lot of them, and most of them are steep goat paths that were cut 200 years ago that are now a road. So we got a lot of that. We've got a lot of aging septic systems throughout the watershed. I think there's only 3 communities that actually have a wastewater treatment plant in our watershed.
What are
they? Newport's one of them, Barton's one of them, and I believe Island Pond has their own.
Nice. In my last home, where I lived for 35 years, I had a leach field. I wasn't on town water. A septic system, but I didn't know. I moved to Vermont with Jenna Sladkey is our audience today, so I'll be talking to Jenna too. Another smart young thing that's making this county better. Anyway, I didn't know, and I'd had a head injury, so I didn't know a lot of things. So one day I went out and all over my backyard is like black tar, so I thought I'd struck oil.
Gold,
I
yeah.
went,
Liquid
oh,
gold.
I felt like Jed Clampett. So I called my friend who was an artist, and I said, guess what? I think I've got oil coming up out of my yard. And it's not anywhere near my oil tank. It can't be my oil tank.
Yeah.
She said, well, her husband was a plumber. So she said, well, let me think about this. Let me send over my husband. He came over and said, that'd be your leach field. I said, what's a leach field?
Yeah.
And honest to Pete, what a mess. I did not know.
Expensive mess too, I'm sure.
No, I tried it out. I did barter.
Oh, good.
And it cost me a total of $1,200 over a period of a year, plus time in my clinic and some artwork. When I lived in Franklin County, everybody bartered for everything.
We need more of that.
And also, you know, when the new thing was built, he said, where do you want it? And let's make it look pretty.
Yeah.
You know, he was really helpful to me.
Yeah.
So that's how a lot of us learn. Not everyone is educated in the plumbing of one's home because it's not a big interest.
Most of the time you buy a house, you have no idea where the septic system is.
Yeah, I do now.
Yeah.
But I don't live there anymore. But a lot of people I can't blame, because if you don't know the questions to ask, you don't ask them.
Yeah.
So if anybody wanted to contact the MWA or any other part of you, we'll have to put that under here so people can contact you and join, so you'll give me a card or something after.
Yeah, we're always looking to hear from landowners, particularly ones that think that they are facing a problem. You know, like their riverbank is washing away and they're losing land, and there's just lots of sediment landing in the brook and being taken downstream. Or if they have, you know, culverts and roads and driveways that are posing problems and flood risks. If there's, you know, forestry practices that they're interested in learning how to do, you know, with as light a touch as possible.
Yep.
We got access to a lot of grants. We got access to a lot of, you know, technical assistance programs. You know, the past year we've obtained over $1 million in grants to apply towards non-regulatory clean water projects, all voluntary. So there's a lot of resources out there, particularly now, for clean water that landowners, municipalities, and even businesses can tap into.
So all they have to do is contact you. That's
In
great.
theory.
In theory.
It's a world of grants, so it's a glacially slow pace, and that's what's part of the challenge with getting some of these projects off the ground, is there's so many boxes to check, and sometimes it feels like it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, but eventually, you know, these projects do come to fruition. And we're starting to get a little bit of our footing underneath us to get more of these projects implemented every year.
Well, that's good. I'm just going to ask a few more questions, and then we're going to take off to the ribbon cutting of the new facility over on Farron Street in Newport, which is exciting. When a person starts a grant process, like I said before, if you don't know the questions,
Yeah.
you don't know who to go to.
Yeah.
You go from door to door. You and Gabby go from door to door and try and get the cooperation of people who have land that you think can either be incorporated into improvement of the watershed or to use as a pass-through to the next piece of land.
Yeah.
That takes a lot of charm in some respects. But if you tell people that grants are offered, is that one of the hooks you use to get them to help you?
You know, that you would think. But with grant comes oversight, and people are fearful of oversight, whether it's the state or federal government. So that's not usually what does it. Usually what does it is we just somehow are able to connect with them. Oftentimes it's fish. People around here love trout. And so we'll walk up a brook and we'll see, you know, a stretch of river that looks like it's a little out of whack or something's wrong with it. And we'll march out of the stream and knock on the door, see if anybody's home, and we'll just start talking to them, like, hey, you know, you got a really beautiful section of stream back there. Did you, you know, are you losing land? Is it, you know, you got problems? Is it washing away? And they'll talk to us. We'll ask them about it. Inevitably, we'll start talking about the brown trout that they pulled out as a kid that they don't see anymore, or, you know, the brookies that used to come up this way, but now ever since they replaced the culvert somewhere downriver, they can't make it upriver. So that's oftentimes how we connect with people. Sometimes it's the model of tractor that I drove at an old job and I'm reminiscing with them about it. Sometimes it's completely irrelevant to the task at hand, and then they just find out that, you know, we're local, we live in Newport, you know, this is where we call home, this is where we recreate, and they realize that, you know, we're not enforcement, we're not regulatory, we're nonprofit. We come here at our own behest. We're hoping to connect with people and share our knowledge about the watershed, and just try to get people to adopt practices and maybe modify behaviors that would result in better stewardship. So.
Yeah, stewardship, that's what we try and
it doesn't hurt coming to the door with the grant in hand.
No, not at all. But we also talked about the Trout River problem. I lived on the Trout River for 35 years and worked on a farm for a couple of years on the Trout River, and used to take my kids swimming there. I had an hour and a half off for lunch, which was a miracle, working on a dairy farm, because it was 70, 80 hours a week of work, but you got the hour and a half for lunch so you could go swimming in the river with your kids. And over the period of time from the time I worked on the farm till the time I left, that river was changed. So much work was done on it, but it didn't do it any good. So for some reason, the engineers came in, and it wasn't NWA, but engineers came in and said, well, to the Kinneys, I think your manure pit should be right there. And we all said the same thing. Well, that river is eroding. It's eroding towards the manure pit. And they said, we don't care. It's going to stop because we're going to change the direction of the river. So
it didn't play out that way.
The manure pit's intact, but it's about 20 feet away from the river, and now I think they've gotten rid of their herd. But you know, it was a frightening thing to watch science that wasn't what we considered good stewardship.
Yeah.
It was too modern and not forward thinking enough because they didn't know farmers, and they didn't know what we had to do with the cattle and everything else. And rules were followed. You know, by most of the farmers I know were the cleanest, most wonderful people that didn't like to wash their manure spreaders off in the river.
Sure,
And so we just saw a lot of things happening there that we thought might work, but then in the long run it didn't.
Yeah.
So when you and I had our first conversation, we brought up the Trout River, and you told me what we were doing on this side because of the mistakes that were done there. So that's another reason I trust you.
Yeah, and you know, I don't know the intricacies of the Trout River restoration project, and you know, this was done in the late '90s, right?
Yeah.
And you know, I come from a river restoration and river management engineering background, but I picked all that up living out west, and they've been doing, you know, large scale river and floodplain restoration projects out there for a lot longer than we've been doing them in Vermont.
Yeah.
And so when I got to Vermont, I was shocked that a lot of the practices that I've been implementing for a decade were kind of unknown up here. And I think one thing about the Trout River that I picked up talking to folks is that there was this approach that I refer to, or a lot of people in the industry refer to as form-based restoration. We're trying to force a form upon this river that is compatible with our needs, right?
Exactly.
And so they rebuilt banks. They changed the slope and the grade and the planned form of the river. And
the river objected.
The river objected, and partly that's probably because in the late '90s we didn't have the tools to do it appropriately. We didn't have two-dimensional hydraulic modeling that would show exactly what a flood would do to this proposed design. We have those tools now, so we can play around by creating that design in 3D space and then subjecting it to a 100 or 500 year flood and seeing how it plays out without having to do it on the ground.
Yeah, I would do that I don't play computer games, but I would do that as a game.
It's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So now we have a lot stronger tools, a lot more powerful tools to evaluate the alternatives. We also have, you know, people have refined their methods. River restoration in the '90s was a fledgling thing, and Vermont gave it a try, and unfortunately it didn't work. Part of that might have been, you know, the designs, part of it might have been the implementation, part of it might have just been Mother Nature. So we try to take a step back from form-based restoration. We don't want to dictate where the river must be and must remain, because we understand that rivers are ever evolving.
Yeah.
You know, they call it a dynamic equilibrium, meaning sure it's a steady state, but it's moving all the time, right?
You're right.
So we focus more on process-based restoration. So in that sense, we're not going to. We may move a river, we may reconnect a segment, we may change the banks or regrade the banks or stabilize the banks. But what we're doing at that time is we're making sure the river has room to move and to flood.
That's good.
Our our problems in Vermont with flooding is not inundation. We're not the Mississippi River Valley. We don't get flooded out from below.
And the
We
Red
get
River.
taken out from the side, from the river moving. And that's because we have steep hills, and when those big rains hit, it comes deluging down those steep hills, and when it hits the valley, if there's a road or a house or a culvert in the way, it just takes it away.
Yeah.
It doesn't flood it out, it scours it away.
Yeah.
And so what we make sure in our project is that we're giving the river a corridor, a whole meander belt width, a couple meander belt widths. And then we're giving them room to flood. We're trying to remove encroachments, trying to remove houses, trying to remove berms and levees, because while that may protect you in that one location, it just means that all that floodwater lands in somebody else's property with more violent force. And so we're trying to give the river a migratory corridor so that it can move as it wants and floods as it wants, and actively removing those encroachments so that the damages are less.
That's a wonderful idea. And
It's not my idea.
Well,
We're just
so-
embracing it.
I'm embracing it too. Speaking of embracing, we're going to cut now. We're going to be heading out to a ribbon cutting. But before we do, I want to, here, you hold that way, and I'll hold it this way. I don't know whether you can see it. It says no lanes, no lines, no limits, Lake Memphremagog, Newport, Vermont. And the other side, the Kingdom Swims that are absolutely fabulous. And they bring so much local economy booming, from Airbnbs to restaurants to every single store, thank you. And it's a Phil White, Kathleen Marcel organization. And I didn't want to participate last year because I was afraid to step into Prouty Beach. And then Prouty Beach washed out because of the floods, so everybody was moved to another lake, but so I deferred. And I will be doing the distance swim this year. But we start at Prouty Beach. And it's because I'm putting my faith in the watershed to have it not antiseptically pristine at that point, but I won't come away with some kind of malignant, terrible disease or suck up some blue-green algae. And that can be done. My optimism for this area is 100% good because of people like Patrick Hurley, and for all of your group, and for the MWA, Memphremagog Watershed Association. And please try and get to know them. It's an investment in all of our time, and I'm just really proud of them.
And it's not just us, it's the Orleans County Conservation District, it's Northwood Stewardship Center. We work a lot with the Department of Environmental Conservation. They are our friends. You know, they're not, sometimes it's frustrating to work with the state, but they can only enforce the rules that are written by statute. And so where we have those rules, they're really helpful. And where we have project opportunities, they're very supportive.
Well, that's good. I thank you, Patrick. I hope you come back with good news, and we'll see you at the ribbon cutting if I can get the camera to work there. Good night, and thanks for watching Life is Good. See you after. Now we're at the place. Patrick, why don't you point to wherever we are? First of all,
Sure.
This is a Vermont beer, and 3 cheers for Vermont products.
Go Vermont.
Yes.
So I'm standing at the corner of Farron Street and Lake Road in Newport. Behind me is a gravel treatment wetland. We just had a hell of a storm last night, so it's plumb full of water. This water will slowly infiltrate through the gravel bed, through an under drain at the far end, and then you can see a clearing through the vegetation along the shoreline. That's the outlet pipe that goes into the lake, and it discharges some crystal clear water compared to what we see in this pond. So the gravel wetland is fed through an inlet control structure, which is right over here to my left. You can see a little pile of rocks and a green pipe coming out. And there's 2 manhole covers just at the top of the bank.
Wait, let me go and show those to you. Oh, we got blinker.
And so that essentially regulates the flow into the wetland. That manhole cover is fed by another underground catch basin. Watch Heather run, she'll show where that is. And so that is our hydrodynamic swirl separator. Heather, be careful not to fall in through the manhole. And so that's a 15-foot deep structure, and that's essentially what is a grit separator. And it's fed by a storm drain that you can't see going under Farron Street, and it collects runoff from 125 acres in the Prouty Bay neighborhood.
That was fun.
Before and after.
This is before. No, this is after.
Yeah, there you go.
We're gonna go over and check out where the water goes back into the lake right now. So here we go.
So here we are at the outlet. This is Prouty Bay on Lake Memphremagog. You can see Heather standing next to a 36-inch polyethylene pipe, and then a smaller 12-inch pipe. The 12-inch pipe is what's coming out of the gravel wetland, and this is what will drain all the water from what we call the first flush storm. So the first quarter inch or half an inch of rain that lands on the ground carries with it the most sediment, the most concentrated pollutant load, and so that's what the gravel wetland will treat. Above that amount, we didn't have enough storage capacity for further treatment, so in that inlet control structure there's actually a bypass, a baffle in the tank. So the first flush gets treated, and then the remaining storm, which has less concentrated pollutant load, will overflow through this bypass pipe, so that in the event of a humongous rainstorm, the system isn't overloaded. It still provides that initial treatment, but then has this relief valve so that it doesn't damage the rest of the system.
Fantastic. And I want to show you something right now. That's clean, that's pure, that's Patrick. So the MWA, yum, is doing a fabulous job. Trust the lake, trust the future. And we have Mary Pat Goulding coming along here, who's done a tremendous amount for this project. Mary Pat, what have you done? Don't tell me nothing, being modest. You've seen this project from the beginning.
I have seen this project from the beginning, which you will hear about we started it in 2016, but when you talk to Ben Hans, who's there, he can even tell you earlier than that we actually started this project.
Yeah, Jennifer was telling me that you ran into some snags. Can you name a few?
Well, one of our snags was that we found an old Prouty Miller burned part of the old building that we did not know was there, and that had to be taken out as hazardous waste.
It was not buried treasure.
And so one of the nicest things that ever happened to us was that the Casellas were very gracious about how much they were going to charge us to take care of that. So.
Yeah, Casella was generous about that. How about that? And here we have Ed Baker. Barber, I can't read, not wearing my glasses. So you're taking notes.
I didn't spell my name right, but that's okay.
Yeah,
I've done that before, Woody.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Payback.
Anyway, oh, thank you. You're welcome. Thank you very much. Now I know who I am. Anyway,
I don't know.
This is Jenna. She's our camera lady and
Hi,
does
Jenna.
a great job. And would you like to say a few words too? Thank you very much.
I'm just a reporter of the Newport Daily Express, and I've been covering MWA issues for 10 years. That's why I'm here today. They didn't tell me anything about the free wine. That's good too.
Free wine. It's too bad you're not all here today. Anyway, thanks, Jenna, and thank you very much, Ed.
I think it's wonderful that MWA has worked on this project. It's important for our lake, our beautiful lake here, and they should be commended along with their other partners that have helped them on this project. So,
Keep up the good work, Woody.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much for coming. My name's Tom Latta. I'm the president of the Memphremagog Watershed Association, and I am really, really excited about this project. Back in 2016, I think it was, I became president of the Newport Marina Condo Association, which is the marina right here. And I did so reluctantly, and I wanted to make a difference if I was to become president. And what I ended up doing was, because we ended up having stormwater runoff drain into the lake on the north side of the marina, and every 10 years we had to dredge. Now to dredge, we had to get all the permits necessary, Army Corps of Engineers, State of Vermont, get a lake bottom survey. We had to put all the silt fences in place. We had to build a road going out to the end of the docks and then dredge it all out. And the cost was about $20,000 to $30,000, which we ended up having to do every 10 years, which is all split up amongst the condo slip owners at the marina. So when I became president, I reached out to Memphremagog Watershed Association. And I talked to Mary Pat Golding, and I then met with Kendall Lambert. Met her down here, we took a walk around, we got stormwater runoff from Ference Point all the way up by the old hospital up on Highland Ave, Memphremagog views, it all comes down this way and was going in there and then going right out into the lake, bringing in about 22,000 pounds of sediment in its route. So she ended up working with her board of MWA, and they came up with a $60,000 grant to assess where the runoff was coming from and design a diversion from where it was going to a filtration system and then into the lake. And at that point there really wasn't very much money available in the state or any grants available, so it ended up waiting a couple years until we were able to finally reach out for some grants. And we had contacted WUV, Watersheds Unlimited of Vermont, and they were amazing. I mean, they ended up giving us one of the largest grants that they've ever given. Started out at $356,000. That time seemed like an awful lot of money. And so we, time went on, and then COVID hit. COVID stopped everything. Nobody was doing anything, and it was probably a year and a half, I think, until we actually finally were able to get going and get, we had to recost the job, and it went from $356,000 up to like $402,000. And then, okay, it's doable. We ended up getting more money from WUV, thank gosh. And we ended up, help me here.
Started it, and then it got more expensive.
We got out, we put out the bids in like March, and Dale Percy of Stowe, they won the bid, and they came up here, they were amazing. They came in here with so much equipment, and things started really happening. Everything was going great until it wasn't. And when they got into this area here, there was a lot of urban soils that was found. There are no archaeological test bores in this area. And apparently, all in this area was where an old buildings had burnt down from the old Prouty Miller or Bayside Millworks or whatever. All this material that we had, we couldn't reuse. And so then we had costs going up, because not only did we have to dig it all up, we had to transport it out. And Casella, I mean, they really just ran with it. We ended up having to get hazardous waste permits and everything just to transport it. Casella took all the material for us, and our costs just going up and up and up. Thank you. We're not gonna wait a minute here. So at that point, we were starting to move along, building up incredible debt. But the old saying goes, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. I'm going to introduce you to Patrick Hurley, who's our project manager, because he's the tough one around here. And before I do, I would like to present a toast to all of you, especially the people who have been here and helped us throughout this whole thing, because this is a real plus for the lake. And as I said, the lake is my passion. So thank you, and a toast to you all who's helped make this happen. Cheers. Cheers.
So as Tom said, things got a little squirrely for a minute. We found about 2,500 cubic yards of burned down building that couldn't really leave in place. And so Dale, Percy, Inc., and Roy, and Brian, and Bruce, and their crew were unbelievably flexible for a 6-week hiatus while we got our act together and hired Wade Heindel Environmental Management to come out here and do some soil characterization work. And while I chased DEC and A&R down to help us figure out what needed to be done so that we could complete this project, ultimately it was a $150,000 hit that we did not anticipate. And that's just the disposal costs. Never mind the extra cost to bring it up to the disposal site. Never mind the environmental assessment work that we had to do. Never mind the incredible inconvenience and project management headaches that it posed for both our organization and Dale Percy Inc. So the flexibility and just like the collaboration was incredibly important in actually seeing this project to fruition. Because of the residual soils, the urban soils that were down there, this wetland now has a liner, a polyethylene liner that goes all the way up to the top of the bank around the gravel wetland. And so we have isolated the stormwater treatment from any sort of residual contamination. And as you can look around, Newport Lakeshore has had a pretty industrial history. So there's landfills on the other side of the lake. There's old industrial sites in South Bay. I see a rail yard and commercial industrial space. So there's no ignoring the fact that this is a site that has been altered. So trying to fit this project into those constraints is incredibly difficult. But getting the support from people like Ben Copans at DEC and Solid Waste Management Division at A&R and Casella, who really chipped in and helped us get rid of all this dirt that we couldn't deal with. Absolutely, invaluable assistance. And just to give you a little lay of the land here, I know it just looks like a muddy puddle behind us, but there's $500,000 of infrastructure underground that you don't see. So over at Pine Street, right behind us about 300 feet, is where the top of the project begins. It ties into an existing storm drain system which comes down, as Tom mentioned, from up by Memphremagog views. And we put in a new 36-inch pipe. I don't know if you've ever seen a 36-inch pipe. It's a pretty big pipe. 125 acres when it's raining generates a lot of water. So all that, it used to go underneath these buildings and through the marina out to the lake. Now we divert it, it comes up the street, goes through a couple different manholes, and then you see over here that little concrete pad with that red and white grade stake. That's a 15-foot tall structure that's completely in the ground. When we were digging a hole, Roy was down there with the GPS, and there's water coming in from every direction. Because if you don't remember, last year the lake had reached a level that nobody had ever seen before. And so you dig a hole next to the lake, you're going to find water. And part of the reason Percy won this bid was because they came to us with more than just a bid. They came to us with a proposal that had a scope of work and an approach that really suited our needs for being a very visible site, very sensitive location, and a lot of groundwater. And they had plans to de-water, to deal with containment, have box trenches in there so that we could really do this work cleanly, consistently. But all that went to hell when we dug a hole and found a bunch of dirt, because we had planned to work up bottom to top. And now we had to turn around and work top to bottom with a big pause here while we got our act together and figured out what to do with this dirt. And so in that 15-foot structure, it's called a swirl separator or hydrodynamic separator. So as water comes down that pipe, there's essentially a washing machine effect where it separates floating material, which is anything that's organic or trash, and it's a grit separator. So that gritty stuff, particulate, falls at the bottom. The trash gets caught up at the top, and the pre-treated effluent continues down line. Behind Tom, right by that patch of straw, is the inlet control structure. There's a baffle in that box. It's much like a septic tank. There's a baffle. During the first flush rain, that's the first half-inch rainstorm, that's where most of the contaminant, most of the sediment comes off the roads and the yards and the parking lots and the roofs. That's the most concentrated stormwater pollutant load. And so this system is designed to treat about the half-inch rainstorm. So that box will fill up and all the water from the half-inch rainstorm will enter the gravel wetland. During a 10-inch rainstorm, God forbid that never happens, we have a bypass system, not a 36-inch pipe that will straight shot to the lake, so that the system won't be damaged in the event of another biblical flood. But we get that first flush treatment, which is the most important part. The gravel wetland is just that. It is a wetland. It's not a pond. It will drain dry in periods of drought, and it's supposed to maintain emergent vegetation on the banks. And that's what this system will look like when it's mature. Again, it's only finished in October. It's been a pretty short growing season so far. But the water settles in that basin, particulate matter settles out, bacteria in the sediments and in the gravel filter media help to absorb nitrogen, help to absorb phosphorus, help to remove oil and grease, help to break down things like E. coli, fecal coliform, which comes off from the backyard where the dog run is, you know, or leaky septic systems or leaky wastewater drains that get into the storm system. So that's percolated to the ground. There's an under drain on the far end that leads to an outlet control structure, and that's what leaves the wetland enters into the lake. So we have a few examples here. When you give this a shake, this is what comes into the storm system. That's what comes into that structure over there. This is from the middle of the pond. And this is what comes out at the end. So it's pretty dramatic, right? And a lot of it is simply time. You just need residence time for that process to be effective. So the reason this is effective is because we have the storage volume for those processes to actually happen. Whereas if you're dealing with a straight pipe, everything that enters the pipe leaves the pipe. So the city of Newport now owns this project as part of their infrastructure. They're responsible for maintaining and pumping out that sediment collection catch basin over there. Doug and Vivian and their family were so generous. I don't know anybody else who would donate a half an acre of lake frontage to a project that doesn't benefit them really at all, but they did. And they granted an easement and a right-of-way to the city of Newport to implement this project. And so this is not public land. This is a private property that they have generously donated to the city of Newport to be able to maintain the lake and to provide stewardship and to treat runoff as it comes off of our neighborhoods. So, you know, there were a lot of people involved in this project. I came in here at the long. Nobody likes a new project manager towards the end of a project, right? It's just a bad mix, right? Setting up for challenges, but I have to say, you know, getting through that hurdle, we learned a lot, right? There's a lot of risk in these projects, and just to know that we had people at WOV, whenever, you know, we were in need, they were like, well, we're gonna make some calls, and we're gonna figure out how to get this done, right? We don't want to leave this giant hole in the ground. We already got one big hole in the ground. We don't need another one, right? So they really came through. Department of Environmental Conservation, Ben Copans, he's been absolutely incredible in terms of just getting me in touch with the people, the powers that be, and the right divisions and the right departments so that we can make sure that we're doing this properly. You know, I mentioned the Space Family LLC again. None of this would be here without them. The guys at Percy were incredible. I mean, there's a reason that they won this bid, and there's a reason this project is finished. Brian's shoveling off credit to Roy, but Brian and I were on the phone a lot last year, and that can be a good thing or a bad thing. But I think it was a good relationship. And then the city of Newport, God bless their heart, not only did they support this project from the start, but when we found a bad culvert over there which had been rotted out since the designs were done, so nobody had gone back and looked at it, they bucked up and they're like, that's our culvert. We'll replace it, have Percy fix it, repave it, and we'll cover it. When we found a bunch of storm drains and water mains and blowout lines that weren't supposed to be there in the ground, we hit with an excavator. Guess who showed up? But Tom and Chris from DPW to help us figure out what the hell they were and whether or not we can cut into them or not. And you know, Jeremy and the folks at Casella, where do you bring a bunch of bad dirt, right? It's got to go somewhere. Nobody wants it. Well, these guys were able to cut half of that expense off the tag because they knew that it was a good project and they knew that there's really no other option, right? So that could have really bankrupted this organization. They could have stopped the project, but people really came through. They pulled it together. They saw the benefit. They saw the good. And as I mentioned, it might just look like a muddy puddle, but it's our muddy puddle.
Proud of it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you to you all.
Mary Pat, did I forget anything?
I think you got it all, but if people have questions.
Yeah.
The only thing you forgot is that you did get a case of shingles as well.
I did. It gave me shingles. I had two really big projects going on at once, and it was not a good idea.
Well, you must admit that you didn't want to do it in the first place.
I did. They called me. They're like, so we got the grant. Good for you. So we need a project manager. And I'm like, send me the files and I'll look through it. And I looked through it. I'm like, I don't want to touch this with a 10-foot pole. There's been a lot of time passed since this was designed. I don't see much of the site history investigation. And I said, no thanks. And they said, but we really need it. And I'm like, okay, we'll do it.
This benefits the whole lake.
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, 75% of the lake is in Canada. 71% of the watershed is in Vermont. So everything starts here and it all flows north. So we're all trying to do our part. And this is just huge.
Yeah.
Well, on behalf of Quebec, I thank you.
Thanks,
22,000 pounds of sediment it's taking out per year.
20 pounds of phosphorus.
20 pounds of phosphorus.
And never mind the other stuff that are unmentionables that are associated with stormwater that have at least a little bit of treatment before they get to the lake.
But with all the other things going on, MWA also has about 12 other projects going on with around $1.2 million worth of grants that we've received that Patrick, Gabby, and Emily are working hard at, both in riparian waters or lands going into rivers which come into the lake, and lakeshore water treatment, the action plans for other lakes, and it all helps.
And if Mr. Scott were here, I'd just ask him to, we've got 8 property acquisitions that we're working on with Fish and Wildlife Department. We are buying river, wetland, floodplain parcels, and the Fish and Wildlife Department is taking ownership of them, turning them into public access areas. We're doing restoration projects on those properties, and they're on his desk right now for review. So we're hoping that those get speedily approved and we can close on some properties this year. So we're doing all sorts of stuff. This is just one of them.